Every time I talk about any of these books, I just instantly want to sit down and reread them. I can't reread 10 books right now. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Evelyn and it's my birthday. I turned 20 today, which means I've officially come to the end of my reign as a teenager. So, as a recent former teenager who throughout her teenage years has been quite invested in reading, writing, and writing about young adult literature, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge 10 books that made me feel, in some way, fundamentally understood as a teenager. Not just necessarily as a person, but as a young person. Starting with Geekerella by Ashley Poston. Elle is a Starfield fangirl who dreams of escaping her abusive stepmother and running away to Hollywood. Darian is a teen heartthrob actor and secret fanboy who is equal parts excited and terrified by his new role as Federation Prince Carmendor in the upcoming Starfield movie reboot. The two of them have been falling for each other via a series of anonymous text messages, but will they recognize each other when they meet face-to-face at ExcelsiCon? I just have so much love for this book and this book series, and I talk about it like kind of a lot on my channel, and part of that is because of how seen I felt when I picked up Geekerella for the first time. I came into the kidlit book sphere of the internet around the same time that I was moving more out of like the Tumblr fandom, fanfiction, Doctor Who, like part of the internet. At that point in time, I knew that I wanted to write stories and do that for forever, but I hadn't really gone off on my own and written something of my own. I'd only ever done like fanfiction or online roleplay, and those had taught me a lot, but I still kind of felt weird talking about it with people from offline, right? And so it felt weird sharing my writing with people from offline as well. And then I read Geekerella, this book that both affirmed to me that those spaces that I had been in and the friends that I made in those spaces were powerful and important, but also showed me that writing about fandom and the things that you love in a more literary sense was possible and that it was fun. Every book in that series, plus Ashley Poston's just general online presence, has helped to affirm that for me, that I don't have to be ashamed of my background in these spaces that oftentimes get, you know, made fun of for being cringy. I was a very shy middle schooler who was suffering from an undiagnosed anxiety disorder, so I was never like peak super hulot kid, but I did and still do unironically own a TARDIS dress, and I bought a fez because of Doctor Who. And so reading a book, a series of books even, where the main character is celebrated for that passion and that joy, it just meant and still means so much to me. Okay, so next I would be very remiss if I did not shout out Becky Albertalli's Simonverse. I really cannot distinguish between the three books, Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, The Upside of Unrequited, and Leah on the Offbeat, because they are so like ingrained in my mind as a single shared universe. I read them all pretty much back to back. Like there was a brief pause in which Leah on the Offbeat hadn't been released yet, but I definitely read the first two just straight back to back. I absolutely devoured those books. One, because Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda was one of the first books I read with a queer main character. Leah on the Offbeat was one of the first books I read with a bisexual main character. I cried while reading that book because it meant so much to me to see the characters on the page identifying in the same way that I do. But there are plenty of books that I have read with representation in them over the years that have not stuck in my brain as much as Becky's books do, and I just think that she writes the teenage voice and for the teenage audience so well. It's like talking to a friend. And I really needed Simon and Molly and Abby to be my friends when I was struggling through like sophomore year of high school. So next we have From Twinkle with Love by Sandra Menon. This book, told through a series of journal entries addressed to her favorite female filmmakers, tells the story of Twinkle Mera, who's an aspiring filmmaker. Twinkle wants nothing more than to tell her stories to the world by becoming a film director. She just needs someone to give her a chance, and that chance comes in the form of Sahil Roy, one of her classmates, who offers to become her producer to make a movie for an upcoming film festival in their hometown. When I was in high school, I was in a 2-year digital video production program. That's how I learned to do all this fun editing stuff that I do for YouTube. In fact, this channel started as a way for me to keep practicing my editing skills over the summer between my junior and senior year. I actually placed 3rd in a national level video competition 2 years in a row. I was like really into this. My first year in that program, I was basically the only girl surrounded by a bunch of male classmates who did not take me as seriously as they took each other. When we would be working with other people, whether it be like interviewing someone or going to a different location to film, oftentimes those people would defer to my male counterparts instead of me, regardless of who was in charge of set that day. I was deemed the most approachable and oftentimes got put in front of the camera to do the interviews, despite the fact that that first year I really did not feel comfortable being on camera for various job-related reasons. That's who I was when I was reading that book. Someone falling in love with a new art form, but finding it incredibly frustrating the way that she was treated within spaces related to that art form. And reading Twinkle's story, where she is so dedicated to her craft and willing to fight for herself and stand up for herself, and reading about Sahil, who learns to trust her instincts and says at one point, like, listen, I want to work with you because I know you're good and I need to trust you. It was just the perfect fantasy, and that's what I want. That is what I want in all of my creative spaces ever, is just like partnership and trust. Next we have Tweet Cute by Emma Lord, which follows Pepper and Jack, who accidentally get their family's restaurants into a Twitter-based grilled cheese war after Pepper's mother's franchise, Big League Burger, supposedly steals a grilled cheese recipe from Jack's family's diner, Grilled Cheesin'. While these two are forming an unlikely friendship in person after duking it out behind the scenes on Twitter, they're also possibly falling in love via this anonymous texting app that Jack created. So this book heavily features one of my favorite tropes, identity shenanigans. These two characters who don't know each other very well in life and are kind of in a rival situation have fallen for each other's anonymous texting personas on this app. The level of dramatic irony there is wonderfully excruciating. The reason it's on this list is because this book, and also Emma Lord's second book, You Have a Match, has the best use of social media and the ways that teens use social media that I've ever read in any book ever. These two teens are running these corporate Twitter accounts and becoming viral because they're running them like teens would talk on the internet. They're bickering and bantering with each other and tossing handmade memes at each other as ammo, and it's so wonderful and just captures the current teenage sense of humor so well, in my opinion at least. I love it so much. It's brilliant. Next we have You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson, which follows Liz Leidy, who, as one of the few black students in her affluent suburban high school, has made herself kind of a wallflower, the person that you can overlook very easily, in order to defend herself from prejudice. Her plan is to get a music scholarship, go to college, study hematology, and be able to work with sickle cell patients like her mother and younger brother. But when that music scholarship falls through, she has to come up with a somewhat unusual plan B, running for prom queen, because in her town, prom is such a huge deal that the winners actually get a ridiculous amount of money. The only problem is Liz is not what you would consider to be the typical perfect prom queen candidate. She's black, she's shy, and she might be falling for the competition. I also went to a bunch of events that Leah Johnson did right after her release and listened to her talk about how this book was inspired by these coming-of-age movies that she really loved when she was younger. These like classic 80s high school movies where prom is like always such a big deal for the straight white kids. And she wanted to write a book for queer black girls like her. And in my opinion, she ended up writing a story that is better and more meaningful for literally anyone than any of those 80s movies. Because in those stories, the character always kind of has to change themselves to fit more into the status quo. And even if they go too far and it backfires, they always end up, you know, a little bit like cooler than they were, a little hipper. And it's not necessarily like them coming into themselves. Liz comes into herself in such a beautiful, wonderful way. It's not until she comes to terms with how amazing and powerful she can be and starts showing everyone else why she, the real Liz Leidy, deserves to be queen that she begins to thrive in this story. And oh, I love it so much. Next we have By the Book by Amanda Sillett, which follows Mary Porter Malcolm, a girl who knows more about classic Victorian romance novels than she does about making real friendships. You see, Mary has always gone to this very small private school where she and her classmates have sort of been forced to be friends because of a lack of options. But when that school closes and they all have to go to regular high school, her friends kind of just ditch her, and she's forced to attempt to make new ones on her own. The way she does that is by dispensing romantic advice. Because although Mary has never had an epic romance herself, she has read about all of them, which means she knows all of the red flags when it comes to scoundrels. So as a perpetually bookish human being who has historically had a difficult time making and keeping friends, I really related to Mary Porter Malcolm. In fact, I somehow became the person in high school that all of my friends came to for like level-headed relationship advice, because even though I didn't date, I do have lots of opinions on how you should be treated in a relationship. And I actually made a list that I turned into a video on this channel of relationship rules in which I used fictional relationships as kind of the examples, which I will link. I did that before I read this book. Like, as soon as I picked this book up and she starts listing out the types of men based on these men in these books that she's read, I was like, oh, this is a mirror book right here. Like, because, you know, there are other books on this list that I've mentioned where the character comes into the story and they've already got this group of besties, right? They're joined at the hip, right? Like Simon and Leah, friends forever. But that was not necessarily my high school experience at all, especially freshman and sophomore year. I got dropped by the group of girls that I had been like really close friends with, or had assumed that I was really close friends with all through middle school, and kind of had to start from scratch. So reading about a character who has to form these friendships for the first time and is very unsure about if she's doing it right, and kind of falls back on this one thing that she does that she knows that they like, because she thinks that if she stops doing that one thing, like, that defines her, then, you know, nobody's gonna value her anymore, which is totally untrue. But that is definitely a feeling that I have felt in social situations many a time. I loved seeing that in Mary on the page, because we do spend a lot of time talking about the importance of female friendship, but we don't always talk about how difficult it can be to find that, and also how important it is to have real, genuine friends as opposed to just having friends at all. It's a wonderful book, and I don't hear that many people talking about it, so you should check it out. Ooh, we're coming up on the ones that I have here with me. I said that and then realized that I fully also have Tweet Cute and You Should See Me in a Crown. Next we have Today, Tonight, Tomorrow by Rachel Lynn Solomon, which is set over the course of the last day of high school for Rowan and Neil, who for the past 4 years have been bitter academic rivals, always one-upping each other, trying to earn the valedictorian spot. On the very last day of school, they end up having to team up in order to have a chance for either one of them to win their school's big senior scavenger hunt, because a group of disgruntled AP kids has decided to try to take them down so that neither one of them can win something for once. I love pretty much everything about this book, but the reason that it's on this list is because it gets AP high school kid culture so well. Like, ridiculously well. I was an AP kid in high school and I considered those kids my friends, but now that I have graduated and moved to a completely different state, like 3 of those kids talk to me on a semi-regular basis. And I've realized, like, no, we weren't friends, we just shared a bond that you can only share if you've been through like the AP US history test together. It's a weird dynamic. Like, we are all overachieving nerds who know way too much, but have like literally no life experience yet because we haven't graduated high school. And on some level, we all want to prove that we're the smartest, or have the most well-rounded college application, or have the most acceptances. I was in a weird spot where, like, yes, I was an AP kid, and yes, I did get really good grades, especially in English class, but I also wasn't trying to get into, like, the big schools, right? Like, I've got former high school classmates who are at Northwestern and George Washington and, you know, doing engineering programs and poli-sci and like all these very impressive things. And I'm at a state school and I just turned in for class a short story written from the point of view of one of Cinderella's mice friends. To be fair, Iowa is kind of like the writing university, and once you explain it to people, they get that you did a cool thing. But also when you just say, oh, I'm gonna go to school in Iowa, they're like, what's in Iowa? I'm like, writers, apparently. So the fact that Rowan doesn't even realize that she is friends with, let alone has feelings for Neil, until all of that ridiculous drama is kind of behind her, it made total sense to me. So this is the scene that I was talking about. The scavenger hunt is about to start. Everyone is about to get the name of the person that they can tag out of the game, and the juniors are like explaining everything. So, before you leave this room, you'll receive a blue armband and a slip of paper with your target's name on it. In order to make a kill, you have to pull off your target's armband. Then you'll assume their target, so do not lose your slip of paper. He cups a hand over his ear. What was that? Do not lose your slip of paper, the auditorium echoes, and he flashes us a thumbs up. I don't know why, but that little moment in this book, I was like, that is high school to me. I also love that this book interrogates the idea of like what the perfect high school experience is, because Rowan has this list that she made for herself when she started school of all the things that she wanted to do before she graduated, and she's reading the list and realizing that she is not that same person, and she hasn't done a lot of those things that she thought she would do that would make her high school experience perfect. She kind of has this weird identity crisis about it, where she's like, I am not the person that me 4 years ago wanted me to be currently. Which is a lot, and also something that I know I and a lot of my peers experienced as we were leaving school, just in general. Senior year is so weird because the first half of the year you're just freaking out about your future, like, I need to figure out what I'm gonna do in my future, and then in the second half of the year you're like, oh, the future is here now, and I didn't appreciate the past enough, and everything's gonna change, and it's a lot to pack into 12 months. I loved my senior year, but I would never go back. I read this book the summer after my freshman year of college, and I was still like, yeah, that was rough. Making decisions and being stuck in a transitionary period of your life is just the worst, and this book gets it. Next we have Perfect on Paper by Sophie Gonzalez, which follows Darcy, who for the past few years has been running an anonymous relationship advice business out of a locker at her high school. When one of her classmates discovers her secret, he kind of maybe blackmails her into becoming his personal relationship coach so that he can win back his ex-girlfriend. So I have not shut up about this book for like the past few months, and that's because it's amazing. I am filled with so much love for this book. I've read it 2 times now, once as an ARC and once when this physical copy made its way to me, and both times I finished it in under 24 hours, and I still love it just as much as when I read it the first time, mainly because of the discussion in here about biphobia and internalized biphobia. Darcy, the main character, is bisexual, and throughout the book has romantic feelings for both a girl and a guy, but the main love interest in the story is a guy. Authors often get a lot of flack for having bisexual characters and then putting them with someone of the opposite gender because, in the words of so many stupid Goodreads reviewers, why even make them bisexual? And so because of this general nasty worldview, a lot of bisexual people, yours truly included, have felt or do feel very conflicted about their potential attraction to certain genders. Specifically, being in a relationship that from the outside may be perceived as straight, and whether or not they are queer enough because they could potentially be in a relationship that is perceived as straight. Obviously, one would think, no matter who you're dating, your sexuality does not change, and therefore your queerness should not be affected, but people are assholes so much of the time. And so it is something that becomes a worry. And this is one of the first books that I've read that addresses that issue, and the book that I've read that addresses it the most and the most clearly and accurately from my personal experience. Because a lot of the books that I've read about bisexual characters are coming out stories, which are great, but this is an issue that really manifests itself at its worst once you've already come out and are trying to interact with other people in queer spaces. There's a scene in this book that makes me cry every single time I read it because it is just so affirming, and I love it. I love it so much. Next we have A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow by Laura Taylor Namey. Lila Reyes has always known that she is destined to be a Miami Cuban baker. She grew up learning how to bake from her grandmother in their family's bakery, and it's her dream to take over that bakery once her grandmother retires. And then her grandmother dies unexpectedly, shattering her whole worldview. Understandably concerned for her well-being, her family decides to send her across the pond to England to spend the summer with her family there. She's very upset by this. Obviously, Miami is 100% where she belongs, and no summer in England is going to change that. Or is it? I love this book for so many reasons. It's got gorgeous prose, the love interest is so swoony, so adorable. It heavily features cardigans, which are kind of my favorite article of clothing. But the thing that I love the most is how much I related to Lila's struggle with her dreams. She has a clearly defined path toward her dream that she has been following for a very long time. And when her plans are disrupted by the sudden death of her grandmother and her subsequent banishment to England, she freaks out because she is no longer on that path. She spends a bunch of time trying to get back to that path, but then another potential path opens up. And it's very different, and it's very scary that it's different, but it might actually help her achieve the ultimate goal in a bigger and better way. When I was a senior in high school, I had to make the choice between coming here to Iowa to study English and creative writing or going to the Savannah College of Art and Design to study television and film production. I went to tour Savannah's campus first and just fell in love with their program and their facility. I knew that if I wanted to really actually seriously try to make it specifically in the film and television industry, that program would give me a very, very, very good chance of getting a job within the industry, which is very difficult to do. But I also knew that in order to go there over the course of 4 years, I would rack up over $100,000 worth of student loan debt. Coming here to Iowa fit way better into the original life plan that I had for myself. I decided at 7 that I wanted to be an author, realized at some point that you could major in English and creative writing, knew that if I wanted to give myself a really good chance at becoming published and learning about craft, that would be a good option for me, but also knew that I needed a backup, so decided that I would major in creative writing in undergrad, but would then attempt to go to grad school for library science, which is TBD because I'm only a sophomore. Those are two very, very different paths to storytelling for kids. Plus I had a full ride here to Iowa, and I felt kind of ridiculous even considering going to do the shiny new thing that I had just fallen in love with that I couldn't actually afford to do. But it was tugging at my heart. And then I had a conversation with a man that I have not seen since and probably will never see again. The guy who was judging my video for one of those national video competitions. And he asked me, hey, you're really talented, like, you're a very talented storyteller. What are your plans for college next year? And I told him about my dilemma, and he said something to me. He went, listen, I know, like, you go to the fancy video school with the fancy video program, and they've got the camera, and they let you touch it, and you're like, wow, I want to do this, I want to learn this. But the equipment changes. The tools, the, like, physical technology, the tools, they change. Telling a good story never changes. And I was like, yeah. There's nothing stopping me from going to Iowa, learning how to tell a good story, and then if I still want to pursue film and television, pursuing film and television then. And it just clicked, and it made sense. And ultimately, it's been the best choice for me. I'm assuming. There's probably some alternate universe version of Evelyn who's just really having a great time in Georgia right now, but I'm having a great time in Iowa, so. And when I read Leela's story, it was like going back to those moments leading up to that decision, weighing all of my options, weighing all of her options, and legitimately not knowing ultimately what would be the best choice, or even if there was the right choice. The one school that I was destined to go to, the one way to become the baker that Leela's destined to be. Laura Taylor and Amy took that uncertainty and made it into something beautiful. And I just really, really love that book. And last but certainly not least, we have Happily Ever Afters by Elise Bryant, a book that I actually read last month. Came in just under the wire. This book follows 16-year-old aspiring writer Tessa Johnson, who gets the opportunity to go to this very impressive, prestigious private art school to study creative writing. It's kind of a dream come true until she realizes that it involves letting other people read her work. And suddenly she is gripped with such a complete and total fear that she can't write anymore. The words have always been there for her, but suddenly they are gone. Luckily, her best friend has a plan. In order to write about romance, she needs to refill her inspiration well by finding real-life romance of her own. There are a couple of reasons why I really love this book. First of all, the idea of teaming up with your best friend in the world to concoct some sort of ridiculously elaborate scheme to make your life turn into some sort of romance thing. Like, that is definitely something that my best friend and I have been guilty of in the past. It's a very, like, overdramatic teenage girl thing, I think, to be convinced that you can make romance go the way that it goes in stories. The other thing being, you know, the whole writer's block, sharing my stories is scary thing. I, as someone who writes primarily young adult and sometimes middle grade, mostly fantasy, was unsure of how to approach being in literary circles. Because on the one hand, my classmates and I are still kind of on the edges of young adult audience. On the other hand, my professors very much are not. There are like maybe 3 classes that you can take in the entire program that involve Kid Lit in any way, and I have taken one of those 3 and probably won't get to take the other 2 because of scheduling nonsense. The first time that I interacted with other writers on campus, some kid unironically told us all that he wanted to write the next great American novel. The first professor that I told I wanted to write young adult said, "Oh, that's great, there's a lot of money in that," which, not really. So I don't know where that came from. I once tried to explain to one of my classmates what new adult was, because they said that they didn't want to write young adult, but they didn't want to write adults, they just wanted to write like college students. And I said, oh, that's kind of a thing, it's called new adult, and it's a potentially growing age group. And they just went, okay. All that to say, I really, really did resonate with Tess's legitimate fears that the kind of writing that she wanted to do might not be taken seriously by her classmates and teachers. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to be helping foster your creativity do not help you at all, and in fact shoot down your ideas, and that can be very scary, especially when you're a teenager and you don't have a lot of experience sharing your work. You don't have the thick skin that you need to be able to share your work. I am getting better at growing that skin, but I just, like I said, turned in a piece for workshop that is quite ridiculous. It's a Cinderella retelling written from the point of view of a mouse, and I'm very confident in it. That shit is cute as hell, but I am very scared. So yeah, there you have it. 10 books that made me feel completely understood as a teenager. Obviously, this video isn't me saying goodbye to young adult literature. I've just told you that it's what I want to write and publish, hopefully one day. It's more so me looking back at young adult literature at the end of my time as a teenager and saying, hey, thanks for being there for me. And I hope that one day I can be there for the future me's, the future little anxious ass teenagers who are confused about everything. I hope that I can be there for them and say, it's okay. I get it. So if you liked this video and you want to see more from my channel, remember to click that subscribe button. With that being said, my name is Evelyn. I make new videos every magical Monday, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.